All right, thank you, Tom. Thank you to the committee having me here today to talk about Lake Superior Cisco harvest and management. If we look at the 2003 fish community objectives for Lake Superior, we see Cisco are lumped in with the likes of slimy sculpin and spoonhead sculpin and bloater and kai into this general category of prey fishes. Of course, we've heard the fish community objective being a self-sustaining assemblage, maintain predators, maintain a commercial fishery. Overall, again, we gave it a B+. There's concern about the ability of some of these prey fishes to support sustainable fisheries, and that's what I'll be talking about. I'm just talking about Cisco, and I'm just talking about harvest and management. Regardless of the size and scope of the different fisheries around Lake Superior, Cisco are incredibly important, both commercial and tribal subsistence fish for people around Lake Superior. And at the beginning of this State of the Lake reporting process, there was a lot of concern about the increasing trend in harvest and the decreasing trend in both recurrence and amplitude of year classes for Cisco and Lake Superior. Looking at the USGS 2016 lake-wide biomass survey, it looks like those concerns were validated, where we saw a 73% decline in lake-wide biomass in that summer survey compared to the same survey conducted in 2011. So we're fortunate on Lake Superior that we have a large-scale lake-wide biomass estimate. We're also very fortunate that we have small-scale jurisdictional biomass estimates for Cisco. However, all of the surveys are saying the same thing with a downward trend in biomass. These are age composition bubble plots from the commercial roe fisheries for Thunder Bay and for Minnesota. On the y-axis you have otolith ages from 0 to 25. On the x-axis you have year for Thunder Bay from 97 to present, and from Minnesota from 2000 to 7. And what these bubble plots do is they do a great job of showing year classes through time. So the size of each of those representative circles is the proportion of that year class in the fishery for that year. And what we see is those year classes also correlate very well with, of course, the USGS bottom trawl survey. And what we see through time is we see the early or the late 80s, early 90s year classes as we progress through. They move out of the fishery, get replaced with the 98, with the 03. And we get to where we are today in commercial fishing in Lake Superior for Cisco, where 2016 we're relying incredibly heavily upon the 2003 and the 2009 year class. However, we see the 2009 year class in the USGS year class strength index is almost unperceivable. So as that 2003 year class works its way out of the fishery, we're only going to be fishing on very weak year classes to sustain those fisheries. Looking at Cisco harvest over the past 2006 to 2016, Michigan harvest is primarily subsistence, tribal subsistence harvest. Minnesota and Wisconsin, or Minnesota and Ontario through time, you see a decline in harvest. That's because they have spawning stock biomass based quotas. So as spawning stock biomass declined through time, so too did their quota, so too did the harvest. Wisconsin waters, we see that increase in harvest 2011, 2012, and subsequent declines in harvest in recent years due to a glut of product in the roe market. Looking at how we typically report harvest in our State of the Lake presentations, the vertical black bars or horizontal black bars are the previous State of the Lake's reporting cycles average, so 2006 to 2011 average. The vertical bars are individual harvest from 2012 to 2016. Again, we see for Minnesota and Ontario, annual harvest being below the previous reporting cycle's average. And we see Wisconsin finishing out in 2016 right about average compared to the previous 2006 to 2011 reporting cycle. Some highlights from around the lake. Again, Michigan harvest, mostly tribal harvest from the 1836 and 1842 seed to waters. In Minnesota, the Grand Portage Band started a hydroacoustic survey, as well as they instituted a spawning stock biomass-based quota system. Ontario has been working very well with QFC, USGS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on building the first stock assessment model for Cisco and Lake Superior. And some incredible stuff out of Wisconsin. Wisconsin did something that in fisheries is not nearly impossible, but it's usually impossible to do, and they were able to institute and begin discussions on instituting a quota during a time period where harvest was increasing, which is an incredible feat. They really did take the hard road on that, and that's good. Good job. So some recommendations. These recommendations are from 2011, but I think they're still relevant today. Update the FCO for prey species. Make Cisco a separate targeted component with a specific fish community goal and objective, as well as to continue the collaborative evaluation of long-term sustainability of current harvest rates. And that's something that I think is really exciting moving into, especially the next state of lake reporting cycle, is the collaborative stock assessment model development that's been going on. It started up in Thunder Bay. They had a more robust data set going back, otolith ages going back to 97. Their stock assessment model is taking into account harvest statistics of both males and females, age composition of the fisheries, age composition of midwater trawl gear, multi-mesh gill nets. We have fishery independent, fishery dependent data. It's taking into account the hydroacoustics data as well. And the model's showing, pretty much validating what we've been seeing through time as well, is fairly stable in the early 2000s, declining, biomass increasing again as that bigger 2003 year class comes into the fishery, but then declining through time to where we are today. That 70% decline that they saw in Thunder Bay and that the model's telling them, really close to the 73% decline the USGS reported in their last lake-wide survey. So looking at exploitation rate relatively low, less than 5%. But again, as that biomass declines and fishing harvest remains relatively consistent, exploitation has nowhere to go but up. And if you remember, we're working on essentially a 10 to 15%, no more than 10 to 15% exploitation on female spawning stock biomass for Lake Superior is how we're operating. So you can see as we're moving forward, if we don't get a good year class to replace that 2003 year class that's washing out now, that exploitation rate is going to continue to increase. We've started a working group to develop stock assessment models for both Minnesota and Wisconsin. That's been a really good effort, really good collaborative effort. I know it's forced Minnesota to really go back and hit hard on aging some of the otolith samples that we've taken but never aged. So there's a whole backlog of work that we're now trying to catch up to be able to put into these models. I'm happy to report that we do have a working stock assessment model for Minnesota, but it is still a draft form essentially. But I think that's some of the most important and critical work that's going on now. These stock assessment models will be extremely valuable tools for managers to make sure that we're managing to ensure sustainability of the Cisco stocks. But I think a word of caution is doing that. We don't want to totally rely upon the models to give us the exact numbers that we're working to produce for a quota, right? We still have to use some best professional judgment in that as well. And I'll take any questions.